My name is Dino. We're talking with our good friend Paul Stengel. Paul is a New York-based learning designer, ed tech coach, and consultant. He is also a learning designer at the Columbia Center for Teaching and Learning. We're going to talk about the future of education and teaching in the digital age. Given Paul's time kind of teaching early in the year, like slightly after 2000, there was not to any degree the amount of technology integration in the classroom. So we're going to try and contrast that time with what Paul does now at Columbia. So Paul, what were your first experiences working in educational technology at the high school level?
Well, there wasn't a lot available to teachers. There was a lab that you could schedule, and there was always the teachers that scheduled like huge blocks, so it was hard to get in there. And then the media center, library turned into the media center at that point, and that's where you could try the school smart board out and do stuff like that. But for the most part, in my own classroom, there was a television, and you could show a movie, and that's about as far as it got. And I think I had one computer, my computer, in my classroom. So I decided, what really happened for me was that I was getting to a point where, I'd been teaching for, 4 years, and I was looking for some new challenges because, fortunately I didn't have too many new classes. So I was looking for ways to refine and redevelop the classes I've been teaching for a while rather than sort of rest on my laurels. And I began to get really interested in how to maybe integrate technology into the classroom. And I spent a lot of time, for whatever reason, thinking about how to do it through communication technologies. Those seem to be the ones that were the most interesting to me. I think I've always been interested in how people collaborating around ideas can help them learn from each other and learn ideas in a deeper way. So I started, one of the things I did was I ran my, back in 2007, 2008, launched a Moodle instance and had my students working inside of Moodle, doing activities. We used a wiki to do like a To Kill a Mockingbird activity where they kind of like put together an exhibit with artifacts from the New York Public Library that enriched different parts of the story in To Kill a Mockingbird. And the thing that I thought was really interesting that I was excited about back then was that we did it across classrooms. So I found a teacher who was teaching the same book at the same time, and the students in their class collaborated with the students in my class over the wiki. So enriching, the conversations that were happening in the different classes were influencing how students collaborated on the wiki. So those were two interesting projects that I worked on, and I even got to a point where I was writing I wrote a conference paper and presented it with some people. A librarian and that teacher and myself went to a conference on internet schools and librarians or something like that. And that was really my first sort of taste at trying this, seeing it work pretty well, getting the momentum, getting the district and the superintendent interested. I think I got a grant to buy some headphones and a video camera, like a flip, so that my students can begin to try to do some of this stuff in the recording video and doing interviews in the classroom for things. And then at that point, I decided, maybe I could do something like with this for graduate school.
How was it received, those initiatives among your teaching peers, the administration at your school, and the students?
So the students, many of them, they were excited. Some of them were like, "Are we really going to do any of this in college?" Like they didn't really think that they were going to use something like Moodle to communicate with each other online or to talk about a piece of work before coming into class. Little do they know they were probably went straight to that, and they were surprised because there was no system at the school that was like that. The teachers were fine as long as I left them alone, as long as they didn't have to do it. One of the things I tried to do that I thought was really interesting was for my online communications class. One of the projects was to the students in that class had to go out and find a teacher that they wanted to work with. So, maybe it was the gym teacher, or it was the guidance counselor, or it was an English teacher, whatever, and build a website for that teacher. So it was a partnership between the student and they got to pick the teacher they wanted to work with, and then I sort of coordinated the efforts. And so by the end of the class, every student had a co-produced website for the teacher. And so I tried to make my initiatives useful to the community, and I think that helped. And though was the second or the third party that you asked? Maybe it was the whole district. How did the superintendent was really interested. The assistant superintendent was interested too, to the point where the tech support people were asked to support me any way I needed. So to make sure I had the right software on my computers, and eventually the Moodle instance that I was running on my own server, they moved over to the school server. So they were, I think, very excited with what I was doing.
I find it really, for some reason, interested in counterfactuals and just the idea of a completely different narrative springing up. Do you think if you could replay this, and I don't know if you can really truly answer this, would you have prefer to have started your teaching in these technology initiatives when you did, when it was a bit more of a struggle, or do you think you would have liked it better now, where it's more almost expected of people and it's fully supported? Because I, from what you're saying, I'm sure at the time at the school, definitely, but just generally, I'm sure you're a pioneer, which would have been, very fulfilling.
I guess I would say that it's nice to be supported. So, it's nice to sort of pat myself on the back, and that I was, interested in something, in a state or in a district where it wasn't really being done. A lot of it, there were some people doing it, but and that struggle, I really grew, and I get to be an innovator, and maybe that's how I ended up at Columbia, because I'm not really sure. I don't really see myself as a Ivy League person. I went to. What is an Ivy League person? But I just never thought I'd be able to ever get a degree here or study at Columbia. I think, I'm very blessed in that way, but maybe it was because I was interested in something that was kind of new and interesting, and it drove my passion, and somehow I was able to come here and study it. Who knows? Maybe if I had done it now, I wouldn't have ended up here. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have had that same opportunity, because more and more people are doing it. But at the same time, who knows? I could have been really supported in a much more sophisticated way, where I could have had my own lab. There was no way I was ever going to get a cart of laptops back then, but a cart of laptops now, or tablets, and people, actual other teachers teaching these things and thinking about how to integrate them meaningfully in the classroom. Might have been a better scenario for me in the end. I don't know.
Could you talk about, I know that now at the Columbia Center for Teaching and Learning, and in its previous iterations, you worked with different educators. Can you talk about how your previous experiences working in educational technology personally at the K-12 level, how that's informed the way that you work with educators?
I think the biggest thing that I always didn't like when I was a high school teacher was to have a curriculum designer or a professional development person come in and kind of give me ideas about what I can do, but not give me any takeaways to get started. Also, not addressing the unique context of where I was teaching, and kind of almost giving me a little bit of a canned workshop that they were giving everywhere else. And I think that has had an impact. I'm always trying to stay true to not doing that to the faculty that I work with, making sure that I understand their teaching, what they are trying to convey to their students, what knowledge they have and unique perspective on it that they're trying to bring to the classroom, and how can I help them do that, more effectively every semester. There's always room for improvement, right? With or without technology. And I try to always take that position from a humble place, not that I have something that they need or that they should really do it, but to be humble about it, and not only that, but I don't really feel like professional developers were collaborators or co-authors. I like to look at myself as being in partnership with a faculty member who is interested in working with me, and I think that's important. So that is probably one of the big things I take from that. Does that answer?
Yeah, totally. This might be a little bit hard to answer because, again, it's weird how we can become a specialist in something because we're immersed into it on a day-to-day basis. But then conversely, when you're away from something, you kind of rapidly don't know anything about it. Try your best if you can to talk about this. How do you think it's different? Like, you finished teaching at the K-12 level around 2008. How do you think presently it's different for administrators at a district level, a school level, teachers or students in terms of the way that they integrate technology now versus they did 7-8 years ago? Is it in fact even different?
Yeah, well, that's really hard to answer because it depends on the district and the state, right, and the policies that are there and the resources and the rules. I think that it might be a little bit easier to get the resources or to believe that the students have the skill sets to use those resources. But there's always going to be somebody that says you can't take that for granted, right? And okay, sure. Put that aside. You can't take that for granted. I still think it's more the case than it was back then. And so I think that, but I do wonder whether or not there's still, for those districts that had room for experimentation in time. I feel like I worked at a district where, we had like a few key things we had to make sure that we covered, but I could basically, it was my own decision about how we get there. And that was very powerful. And because they allowed me to do that, I was able to integrate these other experimental things. But I'm not sure that seems to be in jeopardy with a lot of the ways in which standardized testing is taking over. There always was standardized testing, but it sounds like I'm not in that environment. But from all the classes I've taken and what I've read and heard, things like the Common Core are taking up many, many hours, and there isn't room to play, right? There isn't room to play in the classroom and to experiment as much as there was before. And that's worrisome to me. Does that?
Yeah, no, and I find it interesting where, you'd think, just if you think about it as a reasonable person, I think the idea of selling technology to a district would be easier. I think it's so interesting when you talked about students back in the day going, oh, Moodle, why would I do this? Why would I use technology? But now I think they would love to use their devices. But then now I can see it along the line that you're saying. The time is so prescriptive based on the need to do curriculum to get ready for a standardized test that there's so little room to play that you have these awesome tools that you can't even use because you don't have the flexibility. Along that lines, do you have any predictions for the future, either good or bad, in terms of how education and technology are going to interweave?
I'd like to believe that technology will bring to education the opportunity for more student-centered learning, right? You can have student-centered learning without technology, but I think that there'll be other interesting ways in which thinking can occur within environments that are adaptive to the student's unique learning needs at that point, and that students may even have more agency to design their own learning process, right? And hopefully schools respond to that and break some of these artificial barriers down, like how long it takes to complete a unit. Do students collectively all have to begin and end a learning unit at the same time? Or could technology help facilitate a classroom where some students are taking a little bit longer on unit 1 while others have moved on to Unit 2, but by the end of the semester, everybody's finished the 5 units, right? Like, I think that technology could really help facilitate that. I think that it's already helping teachers understand their students in new dimensions with analytics, right? So I think that as long as teachers are trained in appropriate and powerful ways to use that, and to maybe even build their lessons in ways that take advantage of that, I feel like that's something that people aren't really talking about right now as much as they should be, which is, okay, these tools can tell you these things about students, but how do you build your lesson in a way so that those evaluations and results can help you improve your lesson and help you leverage your time up there instructing them, and maybe even spend less time instructing them and more time facilitating them, and only coming in on those problem spots just in time to support them. So I think data could really help them with that. That's how I like to see, I think that it also may help students who don't do as well with certain types of media to understand things, who might be more interested in trying to learn from video, or learn from building and playing, learning from working within sandboxes, like coding sandboxes, some of the technology that's advanced where you can actually learn to code by writing right inside of a window and then seeing the results immediately, and you don't have to set up a whole sandbox. And I feel like technology is offering that opportunity too, to kind of learn through different mediums that were just not as possible as before, which means to me, I think people with certain learning approaches or preferences, I'm not saying so their preferences may do a little bit better than they have done in the past because of technology.
And finally, to kind of bring this section all to a close, I was really interested in talking to you about like the past, present, and future of technology and education technology in the classroom, largely because of you teaching between 2002 and 2008, where technology wasn't really a big impetus in terms of adopting it, and now you work in technology, and specifically about integrating technology into learning environments more at the post-secondary level. Given that, do you have any reservations? Like, do you have any kind of like sort of nostalgic pangs for the past, where it's like, oh, but I also kind of like the idea of just some inspiring person in front of a classroom interacting one-on-one with a group of students, but then a one-on-one with individual students? And is there anything that we've lost?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know, I might say something right now that is just completely a new idea that's popping into my head that I'm going to have recorded that maybe I'll take back later. But I kind of feel like if you feel like you're missing something, then maybe you're doing it wrong. You know what I mean? Like, technology shouldn't replace the good things that happen in an analog life, and you shouldn't try to replicate the things that you do, without technology in the format of technology. I think that technology, when it's properly applied, will only improve the elements that are really good in the environment. And if they don't, then maybe you should be doing that other thing instead and not using the technology. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that that's sort of my view about it. You're doing it wrong if you long for the days before technology. You should probably not be using technology for that thing. If you like reading a book and you like paging through it, and for me, for instance, I've really been trying to do all of my doctoral note-taking on a tablet. And there's just some things, especially when I write a paper or I have to really study a paper that I'm reading, I have to print it out. And there's no reason to fight that. Like, the tablet is good for quick reading or having the stuff there last minute because you don't want to have a ton of papers in your bag. But for certain things, print out the paper and don't long for it. Just realize that the tablet isn't the right thing for you at that point.
Awesome. So we've been talking to Paul Stengel, a learning designer at the Columbia Center for Teaching and Learning. Thanks, Paul.
No problem. Thank you, Dino.